There seems to be a mistake, sir. We need you to move to accommodate our VIP passenger, Jessica. The flight attendant said, her tone condescending despite the polite words. This seat is reserved for only our platinum members. You don't belong and can't sit here. Behind her stood Karen Wickfield, an elegantly dressed white woman tapping her designer watch impatiently. Her eyes darted between Marcus, the black man, and the seat he occupied, seat 2A, which she clearly considered her rightful place. I always sit. There, it's practically my seat, she muttered, just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Marcus looked up, confusion crossing his face. He had done everything right. Booked early, paid in full, arrived on time. He was a platinum member, yet somehow his presence in the seat was being framed as a problem that needed solving. Marcus calmly reached for his wallet and produced his platinum member card. I am a platinum member, he replied evenly, and this is my assigned seat. The flight attendant's smile tightened, a flicker of surprise crossed her face, quickly replaced by determination. I understand, sir, but this particular seat is typically reserved for a better customer, pointing to Karen Whitfield, our regular platinum member who flies with us frequently. The implication was clear. Regardless of his status, Marcus didn't belong in that seat. Passengers began to notice. Phones slowly emerged. The whispers started. What the flight crew didn't know was that this simple act of discrimination would change everything in the next few hours, not just for them, but for the entire airline, because the person they underestimated held their fate in his hands. This story is the best example of when karma arrives with a first-class ticket of its own. Have you ever been treated unfairly simply because of how you looked? Marcus wasn't just any passenger at 42. He was the founder and CEO of Right Tech Solutions, a $8 billion AI company specializing in customer service technology. His software helped companies identify and eliminate bias in their customer interactions, which is ironic considering what was about to unfold. But Marcus's story began long before his success. Growing up in South Chicago, he taught himself to code at just 11 years old on a second-hand computer. While other kids played video games, Marcus built them, creating simple programs that eventually evolved into complex algorithms. His path wasn't easy. When Marcus was 16, his father was killed in an attack that shook his community. Standing at his father's grave, young Marcus made a promise that would define his life and make people see each other as human beings first. That promise fueled 2 decades of relentless work, starting his company in a tiny apartment. Marcus coded for 18 hours a day while working odd jobs to pay rent. Earlier that day at the airport, security cameras captured Marcus helping an elderly woman struggling with her luggage, patiently assisting her to find her gate. He held doors open for strangers, thanked every service worker by name, and tipped generously at the airport cafe, not because he was being watched, but because that's who Marcus Richardson was. Humbled despite his success, kind despite his power. Now he was traveling to deliver the keynote address at the Global Ethics and Technology Conference. As Marcus settled into his first-class seat, a seat he had specifically chosen for its legroom so he could work during the flight, he chose to fly with Skylux Airlines because it was the epitome of luxury air travel. Their platinum members enjoyed heated towels, champagne service, and seats that reclined into full beds. But behind this polished exterior, Skylux was desperately trying to modernize. Their booking systems were outdated, their customer service rankings had slipped, and they were eagerly pursuing a partnership with a major tech company to revolutionize their operations. They needed this deal badly. What the Skylux crew didn't realize was that sitting in seat 2A was the CEO of the very company they hoped would save them. Flight attendant Jessica Miller had been with Skylux for 8 years. She prided herself on knowing the preferences of regular first-class passengers. She always made sure Karen Wickfield got her preferred seat 2A, the one currently occupied by Marcus. Jessica had bills to pay and knew that Karen's generous tips helped make her mortgage each month. Sir, we have a platinum member who always sits in this particular seat, Jessica said, leaning down toward Marcus. Would you mind moving to another class seat? Her tone was polite but carried an undercurrent of expectation, the kind that assumed compliance was the only acceptable response. Marcus looked up from his tablet, momentarily confused. He reached for his boarding pass and showed it to Jessica. I'm sorry, but this is my assigned seat, he explained calmly. I'm also a platinum member. Karen Whitfield stood in the aisle, making no attempt to hide her annoyance. Other passengers could clearly hear her when she said, I always sit there on this route, it's practically my seat. The situation was quickly becoming uncomfortable. Several passengers were now watching the interaction unfold. Jessica shifted her weight from one foot to another, glancing nervously between Marcus and Karen. "Sir, perhaps you'd be more comfortable?" In another section, Jessica suggested her implication clear. She wasn't offering him another first-class seat. Marcus remained composed. "No, thank you," he replied firmly. "I've selected this seat specifically for the legroom as I need to work during the flight." Jessica's smile tightened. She nodded curtly and walked toward the front of the cabin, where she occasionally glanced back at Marcus. What happened next was secretly caught on camera by a passenger across the aisle. Karen stepped forward, seemingly to put her bag in an overhead compartment. As she did, she slipped a folded stack of notes into Jessica's pocket with practiced discretion. "I appreciate your help with this situation," Karen whispered just loudly enough for the nearby passengers to hear. Jessica's face flushed as she accepted the money. In that moment, a simple seating dispute transformed into something far more sinister, a bribe to discriminate against a passenger based on appearance. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin had shifted. Trevor, the cabin supervisor, approached Marcus's seat with the confident stride of someone accustomed to having his authority unquestioned. His posture was rigid, his expression fixed in what he likely believed was professionalism. "Sir, we need you to move to accommodate our VIP passenger," Trevor announced loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. His tone made it clear this wasn't a request, but a command. Marcus looked up from his tablet again, his expression calm, but his eyes revealing a weary familiarity with such encounters. "I've shown my boarding pass and platinum status," Marcus replied evenly. "This is my assigned seat." Trevor's face tightened. A muscle twitched near his jaw as he leaned in slightly, his voice taking on a condescending tone that made several nearby passengers shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Perhaps you're unfamiliar with how things work on this airline," Trevor said, emphasizing each word as if speaking to a child. "We accommodate worthy customers who have specific preferences." By now, the confrontation had captured the attention of nearly everyone in the first-class cabin. A businesswoman across the aisle discreetly angled her phone toward the interaction, openly recording the escalating situation. Within hours, these videos would be viewed millions of times online. Karen remained standing in the aisle, her designer, handbag clutched against her chest, her impatience becoming increasingly theatrical. She checked her watch dramatically before letting out an exaggerated sigh that echoed through the cabin. "I have an important meeting right after landing," she announced to no one in particular. "I need my usual seat. This is beyond ridiculous." The other passengers' expressions told the real story. "You should get out of the seat. He doesn't even look like someone that can afford it anyway," one of them said. Trevor, emboldened by Karen's performance, leaned down closer to Marcus. His voice dropped to a near whisper, but in the tense quiet of the cabin, his words were still audible to those nearby. "Sir, we can do this the easy way, or we can make this difficult, your choice." The threat hung in the air. Many people might have yielded at this point, the pressure of public confrontation, the implicit threat, the desire to avoid escalation. But Marcus Richardson wasn't most people. His calm never wavered as he looked Trevor directly in the eyes. "I'm not moving," he stated firmly. "This is my seat." 6 simple words delivered without anger or aggression, but with absolute certainty. Trevor's face flushed red. This wasn't going according to plan. He straightened up, adjusted his uniform tie, and without another word walked briskly toward the front of the cabin. He picked up the service phone, his back to the passengers, but his agitated gestures were visible to all. The lines had been drawn. What should have been a routine flight was about to become something none of the people involved would ever forget. The tension in the cabin was palpable as Trevor spoke urgently into the service phone. Passengers exchanged glances, some typing furiously on their phones, others watching with undisguised interest. Marcus had returned to reviewing his presentation, his calm exterior revealing nothing. 5 minutes passed before the cockpit door opened. Captain James Reynolds emerged, his weathered face set in a professional mask as he followed Trevor down the aisle. Jessica trailed behind them, visibly uncomfortable with the escalating situation. The captain's appearance signaled to everyone that this had moved beyond a simple seating dispute. This was now an official intervention. Captain Reynolds stopped beside Marcus's seat, towering above the seated passenger. His voice carried the practiced authority of someone used to being obeyed without question. "Sir, I understand there's a situation," the captain began, his tone measured but firm. "My crew has the authority to assign seats as needed for the comfort and convenience of all passengers." Marcus looked up at the 3 airline employees now standing over him. The power dynamic wasn't subtle. 3 standing, 1 seated, yet Marcus's composure never wavered. "Captain, with all respect," Marcus replied, his voice steady, "I have a confirmed seat assignment and platinum status. I've selected this specific seat for the legroom I need to work during the flight. There's no policy that requires me to give up my assigned seat to another passenger who simply prefers it." Trevor's lips curled into what could only be described as a smirk, the expression of someone who believed they held all the cards. "Sir, if you continue to be uncooperative," Trevor interjected, "we'll have no choice but to remove you from the flight." The threat landed like a physical blow. Marcus's eyebrows raised slightly, the first sign of genuine surprise he'd shown throughout the confrontation. "Are you threatening to remove me because I won't give up the seat I paid for?" he asked, his voice reflecting disbelief. The question hung in the air, its implications impossible to ignore. What possible justification could there be for removing a passenger who was simply occupying his assigned seat? Before the captain could respond, Karen's voice cut through the tension. "This is ridiculous," she exclaimed, her voice rising dramatically. "I'm going to miss my connection. I have never been treated this poorly in all my years of flying." The irony of her complaint wasn't lost on the other passengers, several of whom exchanged looks of disbelief. Captain Reynolds, perhaps sensing the situation was spiraling beyond what he'd anticipated, adopted a more authoritative stance. "This is your final warning," he stated firmly. "Move to another seat or we'll call security." It was at this moment that Marcus reached slowly into his jacket pocket and withdrew his phone. With deliberate movements, he opened his camera app and began recording. "I want to be clear about what's happening here," Marcus said calmly, his phone capturing the scene. "I'm being threatened with removal from this flight because I won't give up my assigned seat to another passenger who wants it." Trevor's face contorted with anger. He reached for Marcus's phone, his composure completely abandoned. "Recording is not permitted." He snapped his hand dangerously close to grabbing Marcus's property. Marcus pulled his phone back just out of reach. "Actually, there's no federal law prohibiting recording on an aircraft unless it interferes with crew duties. I'm simply documenting this interaction for my own protection." The legal knowledge caught Trevor off guard. He withdrew his hand, but his expression darkened further. The next sound that echoed through the cabin was the heavy footsteps of 2 airport security officers boarding the plane. Their arrival marked a point of no return. The security officers moved with practiced efficiency down the aisle, following Trevor's gesturing hand directly to Marcus's seat. The cabin had fallen completely silent. Even the ambient sounds of the aircraft seemed to have faded away, as all attention focused on the confrontation. Marcus remained seated, his posture straight, his expression composed despite the humiliation being inflicted upon him. His phone continued recording from where he had placed it on his lap. "Sir," the first security officer began, "we've been informed there's a situation requiring your removal from the aircraft." Marcus nodded once, acknowledging the officer's presence while maintaining his dignity. "I'd like to understand the specific airline policy I'm violating," he requested, his voice clear and measured. "I'm sitting in my assigned seat with a valid boarding pass and platinum status." The security officers exchanged uncomfortable glances. It was becoming increasingly obvious they had been called to remove a passenger who had violated no rules. "Sir, you need to gather your belongings and come with us," the second officer stated, avoiding the question entirely. Marcus looked directly at Captain Reynolds, who stood several feet away, flanked by Trevor and Jessica. "Am I being removed for refusing to give my correctly assigned seat to another passenger?" Marcus asked directly. "You're being removed for creating a disturbance," the captain replied, the words sounding hollow even as he spoke them. A murmur ran through the cabin. An elderly gentleman in the second row shook his head in confirmation, while a young woman near the back of first class wiped tears from her eyes. With quiet dignity, Marcus began gathering his belongings. He closed his tablet case, tucked his presentation notes into his briefcase, and stood slowly. Karen, who had been watching the entire scene unfold, made no attempt to hide her satisfaction. A smug smile played at the corners of her mouth as she watched Marcus being escorted from his seat. Her seat now, she believed. "Serves him right, he clearly doesn't belong," came a voice from somewhere in the cabin. "But he didn't do anything wrong," called another passenger. "I'm recording all of this," announced a third. Despite the comments, Marcus was being removed. He walked with his head held high, his back straight, his eyes forward, the posture of a man who had faced injustice before and knew how to maintain his dignity in its face. As he passed by the row where Trevor stood supervising the removal, something happened that would later become a key piece of evidence. Karen, thinking herself unobserved, slipped another folded bill into Trevor's pocket. "Thanks for handling that situation," she whispered, her voice just loud enough to be captured by several passengers recording phones. First class should have standards. The implication of her words hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. As Marcus stepped off the plane escorted by security, he pulled out his phone once more. His fingers moved quickly across the screen as he composed a text. Message to his COO Elise: "I was removed from the plane, but they picked the wrong person to humiliate." While most people would be flustered, embarrassed, or enraged after such an experience, Marcus exhibited the controlled composure of someone who had navigated these waters before. "Elise, I need you to assemble the legal team immediately." He spoke into his phone, his voice low but firm. "I've just been removed from a Skylux flight in what appears to be a textbook case of discriminatory treatment." The security officers who had escorted him off the plane lingered nearby, their initial certainty dissolving into uncomfortable realization. One officer was reviewing the incident report on his tablet, his expression growing increasingly troubled as he scrolled through the details. "Sir," the officer finally said, approaching Marcus hesitantly, "I believe there may have been a misunderstanding. The report indicates you were being disruptive, but the witness statements don't corroborate that." Marcus lowered his phone for a moment, his gaze steady as he addressed the officer. "There was indeed a misunderstanding," he replied, "but not on my part. I was sitting in my assigned seat with a valid boarding pass when I was asked to move to accommodate another passenger's preference. When I declined, I was forcibly removed." The officer shifted uncomfortably, glancing at his partner, who was already backing away from the situation. "We apologize for the inconvenience, sir," the officer offered weakly, before following his partner in a hasty retreat. Marcus immediately returned to documenting the incident, recording a detailed voice memo, recounting every interaction, every word spoken, every nuance of body language he had observed. As he spoke into his phone, a young woman approached hesitantly. She was clutching her carry-on bag in one hand and her phone in the other. Marcus recognized her immediately. She had been seated across the aisle from him in first class. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice tinged with indignation on his behalf. "I followed you off the plane because I couldn't just sit there and be part of what was happening. I recorded everything from the moment that flight attendant first approached you until they forced you off the plane." She held up her phone, showing Marcus the video, clear, unobstructed footage that captured not only his removal, but also the damning moment when Karen slipped money to Trevor. This was clearly discrimination. The woman continued, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "You should have this." Marcus's expression softened for the first time since the ordeal began. "Thank you," he said with genuine gratitude. "This may be very helpful." They exchanged contact information, the woman promising to send him the full unedited video immediately and to testify if needed. Meanwhile, back on the aircraft, a very different scene was unfolding. Karen Whitfield had settled comfortably into Marcus's seat, her smug satisfaction barely concealed, as Jessica delivered a complimentary glass of champagne. "I'm so sorry for the disruption, Miss Whitfield," Jessica offered deferentially. In the galley, Trevor and Jessica exchanged knowing looks as Trevor discreetly counted the folded bills. Neither of them realized that this bonus would soon cost them far more than they could possibly imagine. On the top floor of Skylux headquarters, CEO Richard Williams was reviewing quarterly projections when his phone rang. "A video is going viral showing one of our passengers being removed from a flight this morning." Williams sighed, initially dismissive, but when the PR director explained the passenger was Marcus Richardson, his blood drained. Marcus Richardson, founder and CEO of Right Tech Solutions, the same company Skylux was courting for a $50 million partnership. Worse, his firm already owned 25% of Skylux stock. By evening, Marcus had convened an emergency shareholder meeting. In a boardroom filled with nervous executives, he played the damning video of his removal and the bribes. "I'm not interested in apologies," Marcus said flatly. "As your largest shareholder, I have one demand and one decision. First, every staff member involved is terminated immediately. Second, I am canceling the proposed contract between my company and this airline." When a junior analyst rushed in showing Skylux stock plummeting by 12%, the board realized they had no choice. Trevor, Jessica, and Captain Reynolds were fired on the spot. For them, the humiliation was devastating. Their names spread across social media. Trevor found only rejection letters. Jessica faced interviewers who recognized her instantly as that flight attendant. Reynolds never flew commercially again. Even Karen was banned for life and suspended from her job. But Marcus was not finished. Skylux Airlines underwent a transformation under his guidance. Every employee went through bias training developed by Right Tech Solutions. Flights were grounded for 48 hours for mandatory sessions. The process was painful but revolutionary. 6 months later, Skylux was thriving again. Passenger numbers were up. Employee satisfaction was at record highs, and independent audits showed minority passengers finally receiving equal treatment. Marcus even launched a second chance program through his foundation. Accountability doesn't mean permanent punishment, he told reporters. It means earning your way back. Trevor, Jessica, and Reynolds were among the first participants. Through grueling sessions, they confronted their own biases and failures. Trevor admitted he'd grown up never questioning casual racism until it cost him everything. Jessica acknowledged her fear-driven silence. Reynolds confessed he trusted hierarchy over humanity. Slowly, they rebuilt themselves. Jessica found work again as ground crew. Trevor worked baggage handling. Reynolds taught others in the program. Skylux itself became a model airline, and one rainy Tuesday, Marcus sat across from CEO Williams reviewing the 6-month report. "You've shown real change," Marcus said. "This hasn't been easy," Williams replied, "but it's been necessary." "Sometimes change happens not through comfort, but through confrontation," Marcus said. They shook hands, not quite friends, but partners in a transformation that had changed an entire industry.